Hi everyone, welcome to BRICS Briefs. Today we have a very special guest all the way from the USA, Mr. William Wertz. Hi Will, welcome.
Thank you.
Excellent, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Okay. Will is a renowned author, executive, political figure, translator, and scholar. Since 1971, he has been a part of Lyndon LaRouche's political movement. Between 1976 to 1984, Will ran twice for the US Senate. In 1984, he began to coordinate a project for the Schiller Institute to translate the works of the poet Friedrich Schiller into English. He also translated and published many of the works of Nicholas of Cusa in a book titled Toward a New Council of Florence, on the Peace of Faith, and other works by Nicholas of Cusa, several of which have never been translated into English before. From 1992 to 2019, Will was president of the Schiller Institute, and from 1992 to 2006, editor-in-chief of Fidelio, the cultural and scientific journal of the Schiller Institute. Last year, Will published a book, Beware the British East India Company, towards an alliance between the USA, Russia, China, and India to finally defeat the British Empire. In this episode, we're going to be discussing Will's expert assessment of the current form of the BRICS alliance and his postulate stated as towards a four-power agreement among the USA, Russia, China, and India to prevent World War III by creating a new Bretton Woods system based on the American system of political economy. We've got something lined up tonight, Will, or morning for you. Thank you for getting up early. So I'm sure our audience is wondering, because this is not widely known, what is the American system of political economy, and what does this have to do with BRICS?
Okay, well, thank you, Clive. The American system isn't all that well known throughout the world. It's certainly not taught in American universities even. But the American system is a system that which has its origins going back to the Golden Renaissance in Italy and to the works of Nicholas of Cusa. It was further developed by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who inspired the portion of the Declaration of Independence of the United States, which calls for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was his conception. He was also an advisor to the Russian Tsar, Peter the Great, and had proposals for the modernization of Russia. He also had the concept that Russia could be the mediation between Western European culture and Chinese culture. The American system then was further developed by the first Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, Alexander Hamilton, who wrote four reports to the U.S. Congress, one on the subject of manufacturing. And of course, it should be known that in the U.S. colonies, manufacturing was prohibited by the British. So he called for the development of manufacturing. He called for the creation of a national banking system as opposed to the central banking systems which have proliferated around the world and are not really controlled by sovereign nation states. And he called for the extension of low interest credit through the first national bank for the promotion of manufacturing and the application of manufacturing and scientific inventions to agriculture, for instance. This American system was further developed by Friedrich List, who was a German who moved to the United States, became a U.S. citizen. List wrote something called the National System of Political Economy. And he also was very influential in trying to bring this system to Russia. He met with the finance minister of Russia at one point and was promised an appointment in Russia to implement the system. But unfortunately, that finance minister passed away before that could be brought to conclusion. Also, you have Henry C. Carey, who's an advisor to Abraham Lincoln. And he wrote a book called The Harmony of Interests. And during the American Civil War, the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Cassius Marcellus Clay, actually brought a copy of Henry C. Carey's book, The Harmony of Interests, and presented it to the Tsar. So the American system has certain characteristics, as I indicated. A commitment to promoting manufacturing, industrialization, through extension of low interest credit through a national banking system. In the United States, we did have a first national bank and a second national bank. And under Lincoln, you had what was called the greenback policy, where the government extended credit for manufacturing and infrastructure. Under Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, we had the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which did something similar, and also the Export-Import Bank, which extended credit. Export-Import Bank, for instance, extended credit to build a 717-mile road in Burma to supply China with supplies during World War II. It also extended credit for the development of a highway which ran from Alaska in the United States to Chile in South America. So this system also is for protectionism as opposed to Adam Smith's free trade policy. Adam Smith's policy of free trade was basically a policy to allow the British to dump their manufacturing goods on developing nations at low cost, so that at a cost lower than what the developing nations could, what it would cost the developing nations to produce equivalent goods. So this was the Adam Smith policy. The American system does not believe in limits to growth. It is opposed to the policies of Malthus, of a post-industrial society, of green ideology, and of population reduction. All of those policies are contrary to the American system of political economy. And the American system of political economy actually, as I indicated, believes in anti-entropy. It does not believe that the universe is winding down. It does not believe that human activity is a threat to nature. Yes, we should ensure that we have as clean air as possible, as clean water as possible, and so forth. But the idea is not that industry is an enemy of human beings. So this is the American system policy, as opposed to the Anglo-Dutch policy, which comes from the creation of the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company, which were private companies with state backing, which carried out an imperial policy throughout the world. The Anglo-Dutch system believes in central banking. The first professor of political economy at the British East India College in England was Thomas Malthus. And that's where we have the Malthusian policy, which persists to this day throughout the world. That is a policy of the British East India Company. As I indicated, they're opposed to protectionism and for free trade of the Adam Smith type, and it's a system which promoted slavery, which was based upon racism, and so all of the and believes in the limits to national sovereignty, whereas the American system is based on the principle of national sovereignty. And if you look at the BRICS, I would say that the BRICS, for instance, one of the key features of the BRICS is a commitment to the principle of national sovereignty, which is embedded in the UN Charter, and which was also expressed in the Atlantic Charter during World War II, which the British refused to adhere to, particularly in respect to India. Churchill said, the idea of self-determination does not apply to British colonies, especially India. So the BRICS have this commitment to national sovereignty, and that is extraordinarily important. And in a certain sense, it should be. This is very admirable in the face of an Anglo-Dutch form of imperialism. And what I would maintain is that the United States, and I can develop this further, the United States has been, since Roosevelt's death and Kennedy's assassination, has been taken over by an Anglo-Dutch imperial system. The original Bretton Woods was distorted and became the current Bretton Woods System of the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, which is essentially a debt collection agency imposing austerity upon sovereign nations, and not committed to the economic development of those nations. So what I'm calling for is, and Lyndon LaRouche called for, is a new Bretton Woods system based on American system policies, in which the United States works with Russia, China, and India as the initiating forces. But it's not limited to those forces. And I think the BRICS are a very important development because they represent a counterpole to the old Bretton Woods system, which has become an agent of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system.
Right. This is very interesting because, and we just had this comment from one of the audience in this respect, which I think, and I knew this would sort of come up, but I'll show you. So Lithando, the whole point is that we reject SWIFT, IMF and World Bank. A new system cannot be based on an American system. That defeats the point. So I'm putting this up because what Will is going over tonight is the point that what people know as the activity of, say, America, of North America, USA, is not the American system. Will is actually laying out here what is the American system. I guess, unfortunately, our language that we use or terms can confuse this. But Will, you've sort of, it's very interesting from what BRICS is attempting to do, and in some way, like you're saying about sovereignty, they're asserting their sovereignty. You're saying the American system, that's the historical context, an example, because before that there wasn't any real sovereignty. Is that correct, or am I a little bit fuzzy there?
Well, the idea of sovereignty came from Nicholas of Cusa in a book entitled, it's in Latin, but it's entitled Universal Concordance. And in that book, he called for government by the consent of the governed, and called for effectively for national sovereignty.
What year was that?
American Declaration, excuse me?
What year was that?
He wrote that in approximately 1433.
Wow. Okay.
For the Council of Basel in Switzerland.
Right.
And it was a groundbreaking concept. I don't know that concept ever existed before he developed it. And you did have, through the efforts of Joan of Arc against the British, you did have the creation of a sovereign nation state in France, and one later in England. But the problem was that the nation state did not become the hegemonic system throughout the world, and what happened is it was subverted by first the Venetian imperial system and then the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. As I said, this was, for instance, in 1688, William of Orange of the Netherlands became the king of England. So you had a merger of the Anglo-Dutch forces. From that point forward, the Bank of England was created 2 years later in 1690 as a first central bank. Actually, there was one earlier in Amsterdam, but that's where this model comes from. And then after the war, the 7 Years' War, you had a consolidation of the British Empire, but working through the British East India Company.
Right.
So the nation state was expressed, for instance, in the Declaration of Independence. That if there's just cause, a nation can break its relationship to an imperial power, which in this case was the British Empire. And people may not know it, but the Boston Tea Party was actually carried out against the British East India Company, which was carrying tea to Boston.
Oh. Yes, so, I heard that story.
So the American Revolution was actually against the British East India Company. The same
not the British state as such.
Well, not the British people, because many of the people in the colonies were of English origin at that point. But again, right. There was a relationship between this private company, the British East India Company, and the monarchy, which backed it. And that was the way it operated in India. It's the way it operated in respect to China with the Opium Wars. And of course, there were also operations run against Russia. For instance, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great both wanted to open up relations with India, but the obstacle was the British East India Company, which was running India. Tsar Paul I actually deployed troops to India to liberate it from the British East India Company, but he was assassinated by a palace guard in 1801, which worked closely with the British, and received funding from an early NGO. It was called the Russia Company, which was similar to the British East India Company. So the point is, national sovereignty has never become the hegemonic force throughout the world, because the Anglo-Dutch imperial system has persisted and advocates limited sovereignty. Tony Blair, for instance, gave a big speech in Chicago, I think around I forget the exact year, but he called for limited sovereignty and for independent central banks. That was the policy that he called for. So yes, national sovereignty is expressed in the Declaration of Independence. It's a fundamental principle to the United States, but the United States itself doesn't have national sovereignty. For instance, in 2013, no, I'm sorry, in 1913, you had the creation of the Federal Reserve System, and that institution needs to be replaced in the United States. And we have to go back to national banking, which is the American system. We don't have the American system in the United States right now. The issue here is, how do we create an alliance between Russia, United States, China, and India as the initiating forces, and including all nations in the world, all sovereign nations in the world, based upon the original conception of the American system, as opposed to the Anglo-Dutch system, which has taken over the United States and which continues to influence other nations' thinking, including the thinking of the BRICS. Yeah. Despite its good qualities of fighting for national sovereignty.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to bring within this discussion with you, Will, is this sane and accurate assessment. Because as an expert, you can actually do this, and giving many references like you already have, which is extremely helpful and actually accounts of the history. But you're certainly bringing up this particular point of economic sovereignty as well with national banking. So the state able to actually give out credit based on the interests of the state itself, and obviously the people they vote for, who would be in the government, who's going to make that decision and administer it correctly or minister it well. And they're held account by the citizens that they're representing. But this is very interesting in this respect, because obviously BRICS is definitely seen as an economic bloc, an alliance, and a political alliance. And obviously we're engaged here in the BRICS channel, this political and economic being probably one of the more senior topics, general topics. But let me go to my next question. because I want to try and we're going to try and keep this under an hour. If we don't, okay, that's fine. Because I think this is very important, that this discussion, because I know for a fact that people are not fully aware of this. They see the USA as an enemy. I'll just be frank. They see the obtuse military use of the USA military across the world, and but they're not aware of the history necessarily, and why it's like that, which is what you're explaining. So, noting factually, as you've said, that we are currently under an imperial system that has subverted the USA from its founding system, which the ordinary and I would say not so ordinary people of the USA uniquely fought and won against. Is BRICS going in the right direction?
As I said, in respect to national sovereignty, yes, it's a valuable institution. It's effectively a defensive institution against this Anglo-Dutch imperial system. However, it is continues to operate within that system, and I'll point to a number of ways in which that's the case. And I think that the BRICS nations have to break from some of these policies and actually adopt the American system of political economy fully. For instance, all of the members of the BRICS, with the exception of Iran, adhere to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. This agreement is based on the false notion that climate change occurs because of human industrial activity, whereas climate change is primarily dependent upon solar and cosmic forces. This whole ideology really goes back to the World Wildlife Fund, which was created by Prince Philip of England and Prince Bernhard of Netherlands, who actually was a Nazi. And
Whoa.
yeah, there's a Nazi membership card. I can send it to you if you'd like to see it. But the point here is, take the National Development Bank of the BRICS. Leslie Mastrop has stated very clearly that the perspective of the BRICS is to increase the funding for green projects, for decarbonization, for climate change mitigation to 40%. And he has said that they want to increase it even beyond that. And this is not limited to the NDP. For instance, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Fund is committed to 50% in renewable energies and green technologies. And in the recent BRICS statement coming out of the summit in South Africa, they called for an increase in low-cost climate technology transfer. Well, that's no different than the World Bank policy of appropriate technologies, as opposed to a real industrialization of the developing sector. Just an answer to the earlier question, I'm not advocating the IMF and the World Bank. I oppose them thoroughly. They are oppressive financial institutions. They don't reflect the American system. One of the problems with the BRICS is that the BRICS statement from South Africa calls for increased representation by BRICS nations in those very institutions. It also advocates working with the World Trade Organization, and says that organization is at the core of efforts for world trade. And yet the World Trade Organization is opposed to the concept of food self-sufficiency on the part of any nation.
Really?
Yes, it absolutely opposed to food self-sufficiency. My wife is originally from Mexico. In Mexico, two of the staples of the diet are corn and beans. Mexico has to import those under World Trade Organization stipulations. So I'm saying is, and furthermore, just to give you a sense, so what I'm saying is that unfortunately the BRICS is operating within the confines of this debacle of the IMF and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, and it adheres to the Paris Treaty, which is contrary to the interests of the industrialization of developing sector nations. It also has there is also a call for developed nations to send something in a range of $100 billion a year for losses and damages suffered by developing sector nations due to climate change, I guess. Now, the problem here is what you really want to do is create an American system in the developing sector nations, as opposed to a Malthusian system, and get them to export high technology capital goods to the developing sector so they can develop, industrialize. That's what's actually necessary. And a new Bretton Woods system, which is what Lyndon LaRouche advocated and I'm advocating, would actually bring these four nations, the United States, Russia, China, and India, together against their historical common enemy, the Anglo-Dutch system of Thomas Malthus and Adam Smith. That's what's actually required right now. And so I think that the BRICS can play an incredible role in helping to bring about such a new Bretton Woods system, but that they're operating within the geometry, which is still, despite their positive efforts, still defined by the World Bank and the IMF, which I think has to be replaced.
Right. Yeah. No, that's you. And I'll just wanted to point out, I was going to say this before, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Just recently, the Netherlands, they said it's okay for NATO or Ukraine to strike deep into Russia with the weapons. And I looked up, is Netherlands a monarchy? And yes, it's a monarchy. Is Great Britain a monarchy? Yes, Great Britain is a monarchy. And I'm not having to go at monarchies. I'm just saying, right, this is this constant chatter about democracy, and these places are monarchies. Those are completely different, by the way. There's completely different political philosophies, and they say they're democracies as well. I'm sort of going on this line. I'll bring it to a point. They say, about democracy, and they say, well, we have governments under these monarchies. But I can tell you from living in Australia that it ain't a representative democracy by any stretch of the imagination. And here in Australia, we have a constitution. Those countries don't have constitutions. England doesn't have a constitution. I'm pretty sure Netherlands does not have a constitution. So again, this is referencing as well what Will has brought up about the USA Constitution being fundamental to originating the American system, national banking, right? But I just wanted, you were talking about this particular point too with the green economy, right? This green economy. And because we know from feedback from our audience that some know what's going on and some do not what's going on. So that, it's fairly half for our audience about the green agenda. But what we've seen from the BRICS is that they're advocating for the so-called green economy, and they talk a lot about this, but there's very little actual action from the BRICS. What's your take on that observation? Because I think that's a fairly accurate observation, but what do you think?
Well, the problem right now is because the BRICS are operating within this Anglo-Dutch imperial system, financial system. They're not actually able, the NDP New Development Bank, or NDB, is not able to really make a lot of investments. The 2/3 of the investments of the NDB are in U.S. dollars. And for instance, they because of the high interest rates in the United States and in Europe, England, it costs too much to borrow money. So, for instance, I think it was in the year 2000. I think it was the year 2022. They were only able to spend about $1 billion.
It's very little,
which is very, very little. As I said, a lot of this goes to green projects, whether those are solar or wind projects, biofuel projects like in Brazil, and so that's the problem, as opposed to really developing the industry, which industry requires a high energy flux density, and which you can't get from wind or from solar in particular. Hydroelectric is fine. Nuclear energy is preferable, and as opposed to windmills and and solar panels, which take up vast expanses of land. So the size of investment of the New Development Bank is very, very small, and it's dependent upon the dollar system. And for instance, Leslie Mastrop said that their intention is to get to something in a range of not even 1/3, but in terms of transactions in national currencies. I think a lot of the development among BRICS nations is bilateral, involving increasingly low national currencies, which is good. It's understandable, given the illegal coercive sanctions policies. Now, one of the things that I would point out is that Donald Trump has said that he's committed to defending the U.S. dollar as an international reserve currency, and that he believes that the move towards de-dollarization would represent the biggest defeat that the United States has suffered in 200 years. He said that we are driving people away from us through sanctions, and that as a result, he doesn't love sanctions. Now, of course, he has himself imposed sanctions, but not on this level. So I think it would, if there is any possibility of collaboration between Russia, China, India, and the United States, it would be under a Trump administration. And what he would have to do is to eliminate these coercive sanctions. If he wants to defend the dollar, that's what he has to do. He has to stop driving people away.
Makes sense.
And you have to create a new Bretton Woods system which eliminates all of the things which the IMF and the World Bank are doing, which is not for economic development. It's not the American system. It's a genocidal financial policy. It's a colonial policy. It's an imperial policy. That's what they represent. So if you replace them with a new Bretton Woods system based on American system policies, then you can talk about an international reserve currency in terms of the dollar. One of the problems is that the alternative, which has been put forward by a number of spokesmen, including Leslie Mastrop, but also the former chairman of the Bank of China. I'm not sure I pronounce his name right, but Sean. I actually don't know. I can't pronounce his name. I apologize.
Okay,
but
that's okay. I can't either.
He called for, said that Roosevelt was wrong, and that John Maynard Keynes, his proposal for a Bancor, which is a reserve currency, not based upon national currency, but basically a basket of currencies. That this is what should have been done. Now, who is John Maynard Keynes? John Maynard Keynes began his career in the India office of the British Empire. His first paper he wrote was on Indian finance. He
Oh,
became,
man.
later on, he admitted that his entire economic policy was based upon Thomas Malthus. He became the I think the president of the British Malthusian League, and also head of the British Eugenics Society. That's John
God.
Maynard Keynes. Now, at Bretton Woods, Roosevelt rejected Keynes's policies, and he was also, Keynes at that point was representing the Bank of England. So it is a mistake, in my view, for the BRICS to be, or any of the BRICS nations to be entertaining the ideas of John Maynard Keynes. And this is in the discussion process right now. So again, my view here is I'm not defending policies which are coming from the United States at this point, because I believe that they're under the influence of Anglo-Dutch imperial system ever since, as I said, Roosevelt's death and Kennedy's assassination, both Kennedy's assassination. And I think Donald Trump is attempting to restore an American system. He gave a number of speeches back in 2016 calling for the American model of economy, citing Abraham Lincoln, Alexander Hamilton, and William McKinley, among others. How clear his idea is of that is uncertain. He has definitely not called for national banking in the United States. He has definitely not called for a new Bretton Woods, to my knowledge. What I'm saying is, for such an alliance between these four powers, you would have to have leadership in the United States recaptured by people committed to the American system. And we will have to educate people both in the United States, but also in the BRICS nations as to what the American system is, so that big mistakes are not made. And there has always been a tremendous receptivity to the American system in Russia, in India, and in China. For instance, I mentioned earlier, Friedrich List met with the finance minister of Russia at one point. Cassius Marcellus Clay, the U.S. ambassador to Russia, gave Henry Carey's book, Harmony of Interest, to Tsar Alexander during the Civil War. Count Witte, who was the finance minister at the turn, basically in the late 1800s of Russia, published a brochure called National Economy and Friedrich List. And Mendeleev, the scientist, wrote a paper on tariffs and protectionism. These were all based on Friedrich List. I would also point out that in 2005, Valery Fadeev, who was an advisor to President Putin now, published this pamphlet by Count Witte in a magazine called The Expert. So List's and Carey's ideas are very well known in Russia. Similarly, in China, List's National System of Political Economy was translated into Chinese and published in the early 1920s. It was retranslated and republished in 1961. And later on, another work by List called The Natural System of Political Economy was translated and published in China. In India, the economists there have always been supporters of Hamilton, Henry C. Carey, and especially List, because they were looking for an alternative to Malthus and Adam Smith, who were the architects of the subjugation of India. So what I'm saying here is that the American system has been well received in these countries, and has actually had a big influence in these three countries, among others. So it would not be a far stretch to get an agreement between the United States, which would have to return to that policy, and Russia, India, and China. It would be in all of their interests. And we would have to get under a new Bretton Woods system based on that American system policy. We would have to eliminate the Paris Climate Change Agreement. and we'd have to replace the WTO with with a newly created new Bretton Woods system. That's what we have to do. And if America and here's the big issue, the question of war.
Yeah.
The driving force of war is this Anglo-Dutch imperial system, which denies national sovereignty, denies economic development of peoples throughout the world, including within the developed sector. Look at Germany. They basically committed economic suicide, and the outsourcing and the globalization that deindustrialized the United States. These policies are not in the interest of the United States or in the interest of any nation on the face of the earth. So we can create what I consider to be a real win-win situation through a new Bretton Woods system. If you don't do that, then you're leaving the Anglo-Dutch system in place, even as you try to develop a counterpole with the BRICS. If that system is in place, then you'll have two blocks, and the financial system, which is driving war throughout the world, will continue to exist. So you have not eliminated the danger of a third world war unless you replace that system overall. So you can't. So the mistake being made by BRICS nations is to try to develop an alternative which is within this climate of the continued existence of the Anglo-Dutch liberal imperialist system. For instance, a multipolar world in which the Anglo-Dutch system continues to be a significant pole is a danger to humanity, and would be a danger of continued danger of World War III. So I would be the first to admit the key to this is bringing about a change in the United States. And that I have no illusions about that. That would be very difficult. But that's something to be encouraged by BRICS nations. And also, it should be recognized that we have existed under an Anglo-Dutch imperial system since approximately 1763 within the world as a whole. Okay? And there have been exceptions to that. There have been attempts to break out of that. But that means that the thinking of all throughout the world, perhaps in different ways, is still affected by the geometry of this dominant Anglo-Dutch financial system. And so that, I think, is reflected by the acceptance of green ideology, free trade policies of the WTO, and also this willingness to consider the ideas of John Maynard Keynes, who was a committed Malthusian, committed to also population reduction. He actually visited Soviet Russia and advocated population reduction in Russia. I mean, Russia lost millions of people, tens of millions of people in World War II, but the world has a demographic problem. China has a demographic problem because of the one child, now two child policy. Other nations, Europe, children are not being born. And there are those who want to reduce the world's population to 1 billion. They believe that the carrying capacity of the earth is 1 billion people. We now have over 7 billion. What does that mean they intend to do to the other 6 billion people? But the argument is that it's a Malthusian argument, that the agricultural production cannot sustain a growing population. But the American system believes that through scientific invention, fertilizer, better agricultural methods, application of manufacturing to tractors and other vehicles to agriculture, we can increase food production to sustain a growing population. And what's to say that we can't actually go into space? The population of the Earth does not forever have to be limited to the Earth. We can go into space. Human beings can actually help develop this solar system, and perhaps eventually beyond that. So that's the perspective that one has to have.
Yeah, that's a very optimistic view as well, I would say, and it's definitely clear, at least to me, hopefully to the audience, that this point you're making, which I read your postulate, a new Bretton Woods to get us away from this criminal financial empire, imperial system, the financial imperial system that will stave off World War III. And that's very important. So I'm going to ask you the next question, sort of prompt here, going really into the meat of this war problem. Now, BRICS countries are seeing, especially recently, an increase in subversion, political manipulation, and overt confrontations. So for the last few years, hot wars are taking the momentum away from the BRICS Plus, establishing their systems of cooperation. Is there a primary source of this war effort? You've certainly covered a bit of this, but is there a primary source?
Yes. It is this Anglo-Dutch imperial financial system. That is the cause of war throughout the world. It is a commitment to gain control over resources based on the false idea that there are limits to population, that there are limits to population growth and to industrialization. So the United States, many after World War II, within the patriotic elements of the U.S. intelligence service, talked about the fact that what the British wanted to accomplish is to reduce the United States to a dumb giant on a British leash. And that's effectively what has occurred. The United States is the power from a military standpoint, although if you deindustrialize, then you're wiping out the basis of your military power.
Yeah.
But the United States it may have more military power than the British, but the British and the Dutch. Remember, you were mentioning the Netherlands. The new head Secretary General of NATO is the former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who models himself upon Winston Churchill. So that's what we're dealing with here, and this is it's this element which is really behind all of the color revolutions, the coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014, the efforts to contain Russia in particular. The great game, which became the arc of crisis under Brzezinski and continues to this day, of creating conflicts all around Russia. This goes back to the British East India Company. It goes back to when Tsar Paul I deployed troops to India to liberate it from the British East India Company. Those troops, immediately after his assassination, were recalled by his successor. So it never actually occurred, but they were deployed. And so the British East India Company was at that point obsessed with the idea of how do they prevent any Russian incursion into their crown jewel, India, in the future. And they developed the Great Game, which was basically to secure the route to India from Russia through treaties with at that time Persia, and by controlling Afghanistan. That's the source of the Afghanistan wars that conducted by the British. They wanted to make sure that the Russians could not intervene. And for instance, the Great Game comes from that period, and it's existed over all of these years. But there is a history of the United States working closely against the Anglo-Dutch system historically. This was the case during the American Revolution, because the U.S. colonists recognized what the British were doing to the Indians, and they were committed to that not occurring to them. The same year that the British they gained what's called the Devani, which was the right to collect taxes and to administer the revenue of Bengal in India. That was basically 1765. Is the same year that the British imposed the Stamp Act in the colonies. They were moving to trade the same kind of financial control over the colonies, and of course the British were sending opium grown in India to China. And during the American Civil War, you had, before the American Civil War, you had two opium wars directed against China to force them to accept opium from India, grown in India, shipped there under the auspices of the British East India Company. You had the Sepoy Rebellion in India, which was the Indian troops who worked for the British. They revolted, and it failed. But the British were convinced that the Russians were going to intervene at that time to support the rebellion. The Russians did not at that time do so. But these are times in history when these four powers worked together, and then World War II. Mm. Roosevelt worked closely with China and also Russia. He couldn't conduct the war fully according to his own views because of the alliance with Churchill. And Churchill made it very clear that he was not fighting World War II in order to abandon the British Empire. He was fighting World War II to preserve the British Empire. And Roosevelt also intervened with Churchill to try to get Churchill to agree for the Indians to be able to run their own nation and make their own decisions in respect to World War II, and Churchill rejected that. But there has been this alliance throughout history, and that's the alternative, really, to World War III, and it's the alternative to all of these color revolutions, all of the coercive sanctions that have been undertaken, and the hot wars that are going forward. And it's true, the Dutch are directly involved in with the British and NATO, and sometimes you have to sort of you have to see through the disguises of what's going on. You have to see through to who is actually controlling things, and the force controlling things does not necessarily control it through military power. The Anglo-Dutch system controls it financially and by the way people think. There's the American poet Edgar Allan Poe said that if you believe that there are only two pathways to truth, inductive empirical reason and deductive Aristotelian logic, then the oligarchy can control you, and you will either creep or crawl before that oligarchy. However, that's not the nature of man. The nature of man is hypothesis, is creative reason to develop new higher order ideas. And he said, so Edgar Allan Poe said that's the method of Johannes Kepler, the astronomer, develop new higher order ideas. That's the nature of man, creativity. Man is created in the living image of the creator. He is He's not God, but he's in the image of the creator through his creativity. And so what I'm saying is that this moment in history, what's required is creativity. The choice is not between the old Bretton Woods system of the IMF and the World Bank and the Anglo-Dutch imperial methods of coercive sanctions, color revolutions, and so forth. And on the other hand, the BRICS per se. We had to soar to creative reason, and the creative reason that I'm proposing is a four-power agreement based upon a rejection of Anglo-Dutch methods and an acceptance of American system methods, which does not mean American chauvinism. It's a method of economy. It's a concept of society, and that doesn't mean that an imposition of values on other nations or a violation of their traditions, because it's based upon respect for national sovereignty. That's the idea. So some would say that's impossible, but I would say unless we fight for that, then we don't get ourselves out of a geometry as a human species, which can lead to World War III, if not immediately, at some point down the line.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to see that, and that's what I particularly really wanted to speak with you on this, is that you're saying there's a solution. There is a solution to this. We need to be creative and optimistic and go and look. And I would say, and that's why I'm going to bring up your books, Will, because this is particularly important, because what you're talking about with this solution, because we're very close to war. I mean, we're very close to being snuffed out in a very, I mean, I don't really want to even think about it, frankly. But, we have to you got to confront your issues. And that's why this discussion is very important. So this book Will has written, this is particularly important. And I was just going to ask you, actually, Will, in this particular book or this book, is this something you can read and you will actually get an understanding of the American system, a political economy? Or is it more on a different vein? Do you actually go into it in these books?
Yes. The let me just get the table of contents. I'll just let you know.
Okay.
The first chapter is the development of the concept and the emergence of the sovereign nation state. The second chapter is the species characteristics of the American system of political economy. So I go through this in quite a degree of depth. Third chapter, the emergence and species characteristics of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. And then it has chapters that go through the consolidation of the British Empire in India before and during the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, India, China, and Russia, discussing that. I mean, I failed to mention, but it was Catherine the Great who created the League of Armed Neutrality against the British during the American Revolution, and it was Tsar Alexander, during the Civil War, who sent the Russian fleet to the New York City and San Francisco harbors to prevent British intervention in the Civil War in behalf of the Confederacy. So it goes through that. It goes through what I said about Tsar Paul I and the emergence of the Great Game against Russia, the Opium Wars, the Sepoy Mutiny just before the American Civil War, the alliance of the U.S., Russia, and China to defeat the Nazis and the Japanese imperialists. And then the last three chapters really present a solution, the way forward in the United States of America, a proposal basically for a bipartisan approach in the United States of America based on American system methods. Chapter 11, the transformation of the U.S. Federal Reserve into a third national bank of the U.S. And then Chapter 12 is the proposed agreement between the United States, Russia, China, and India to initiate the creation of a Bretton Woods system. And the epilogue is recognizing and overcoming a common disease in the way we think as a result of living under this Anglo-Dutch imperial system for all of these centuries.
Yeah, that's very important.
It's that. The other book is includes, it's called The Four Powers. This was published in 2019, I believe. This includes many writings by Lyndon LaRouche, and it also has a chapter which deals with history of U.S.-Indian collaboration, and a chapter on U.S.-China collaboration historically. And the preface to the book is written by myself. It was a speech that I gave on Franklin Roosevelt and the Forgotten Man. Now, of course, Franklin Roosevelt talked about the Forgotten Man, referring to the ordinary citizens who were being forgotten by this system, by the money changers in the temple, as it's the way he described Wall Street. But I also meant by that Roosevelt himself was a forgotten man, because many don't really appreciate what he represented. So the two books give are complementary, but there's more from Lyndon LaRouche directly in the second book, and my book deals with the American system versus the Anglo-Dutch system directly, and also through the history of the collaboration among the four powers, and also the essentially the way forward, both within the United States but also internationally.
Okay, no, that's great, because we do want people to get solutions, and this discussion we're having, that's ideal. They can, and I'll just note, it actually says here, Kindle edition, $0 if I think you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. I guess that's saying, is that right?
Yeah, it is. So this would be valuable for people internationally. If you live in certain countries, you can get the paperback version, which is $15. But if you subscribe to Kindle Unlimited, that means you have access to all books on Kindle, including this book. It's also so that's the way it would work. So if you have that, otherwise it's I think it's, what is it, something like
it says
$9.99 or something like that. If you don't have an unlimited subscription to Kindle.
Okay, so there's really no reason really to not have a read this if you're interested. I mean, I'm not saying you should go out and buy Will's book. I'm just saying there is a solution, and Will is offering his professional assessment. And he's published a book presenting his solution. And I just wanted to also show the audience the other books that you have written. I actually am going to buy this one myself. I'd really like to know, especially after I listened to your the class series about Nicholas of Cusa. That was just a totally different, which I expressed to you already then, but that was really profound, because I've listened to Lyndon LaRouche's works for quite a while, and all the people that have been around him, and I've never heard someone put it like that. But these other books, I definitely wanted to show this, and particularly just so the audience knows, obviously we want to give something back to the professionals that come on, and they speak with us, and they take their time, because we're not paying them, right? Just, and so we really appreciate that, and I'm showing this, but particularly I'm showing this because in this case, Will is offering a solution, and we don't know necessarily what's going to happen with BRICS. At this point, I'm actually not sure totally. No, it's up to you, Flora and Cosmo. You whatever you like, right? But I'm not sure that what BRICS is currently doing in this current situation and where it's heading. It looks very positive and optimistic, and there's issues, right, as you pointed out, Will. But we may actually have this situation, which I mentioned before, where we have blocks of countries that start to actually war with each other rather than what we're hoping will be a sort of a freedom from the current existential war. And I'm hearing you clear, Will, where you're saying, look, the problem we've got is this criminal financial empire, the Anglo-Dutch Imperial system. That's the actual problem. And if we address that actual problem, which we've identified, then we can work this out. And I'm saying that BRICS can do that if these people, and we as the audience, as the ordinary person, understand what's going on, and we advocate and we get ourselves educated, we participate in the political process, and then we hold our representatives to account and say, look, this is what you should be doing. This is what we want to see. I know what's going on, right? So that's just to say that as well, right? We've gone way over an hour. Well, we haven't gone way over, but we've gone over an hour. And I actually wanted to ask you this, but you sort of covered this. But if you could cover this briefly, Will, with us, with the support of a new USA, potentially with Trump coming in, we hope, could we avoid World War III? I mean, especially this World War scenario, more likely than a series of local conflicts such as the proxy conflicts like Ukraine or Taiwan or the Middle East. What do you think?
No, I think we can avoid World War III. Trump has been very clear. He says that it's good to work with Russia. It's good to work with China. That's what he said. And he said that he would bring the war in Ukraine to a conclusion. He hasn't said how, but that's good. He's not going to be able to do that unilaterally. He's going to have to work with President Putin in some way to accomplish that. He's also there were no wars during Trump's first administration. There were no wars. So I think, and I think another important aspect is the fact that you have leading Democrats like RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and of course Elon Musk considered himself a Democrat as well, coming over to Trump's side. And if you listen to RFK Jr., for instance, on the origin of the Ukraine war, he's very, very clear on this in terms of the unconstitutional coup that was carried out. And he's motivated by his uncle's solution to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was to make a deal with the Russians to withdraw missiles from Cuba and withdraw missiles from Turkey. And he also gave an order before he was assassinated to withdraw troops from Vietnam. So, and I heard Trump recently just refer to the fact that you've got FDR Democrats and JFK Democrats who are joining with him. That's very positive. But again, and it's along the lines of what you said, Clive, it depends upon the citizens to educate themselves, but also to educate leaders, both in the United States as well as in other nations, to understand what the actual root cause of war is and what has to be addressed. If you don't address that, you're like the prisoners in the cave in Plato's Republic, where they don't see the actual sun, but they see the shadows on the walls of the cave, and they're basically not allowed to move their heads. So they never get to actually see what the cause is. They just see the reflections, and the actual cause of the problem today, and that's really critical to what I've tried to say, is the continued existence of an Anglo-Dutch imperial system, and that system. It's a system of ideas. It's a financial system, and it also deploys militarily. But the really real way in which they control things is mentally. It's like, as I said, in terms of Edgar Allan Poe, they get you to engage in empiricism, where you think you know something, but you're just having sense perceptions, or you have logical deductions from assumptions which are false. When what you've got to do is step out of that. You've got to get outside the cave, go beyond the shadows on the wall, and look directly at the sun. Look at the truth. What's causing the shadows on the wall? It's the sun. And in this case, we're talking about this system, and that's what has to be replaced. And because it has existed for so long, and it controls educational system and media, and habits of thought, its ideas are embedded in our minds. So we have to examine this historically and philosophically in order to free ourselves from it. And that's the only way we're going to prevent World War III in the long term. In other words, we may be able to halt World War III in the short term by, for instance, Trump taking certain actions if he's reelected, but he can only be president for 4 years. How do we ensure?
Exactly. That's what I'm worried about.
This doesn't continue to exist if that system is still in place. And if that system's still in place, it's going to be acting against him, even if he is reelected, as they did during his first administration with Russiagate. So
no, absolutely.
I think is the issue.
Yeah, and again, we're going way over, but I got to ask you this last question. And I think you've generally covered it, but I'll ask it. With the covert and overt subversion of the U.S. military by this imperial system, why should representatives and officers of BRICS plus countries listen to any advice from the USA? I'm being very blunt, right? But yeah.
Well, from the existing administration, I wouldn't listen to anything. Just to be blunt, because they reflect this policy. I wouldn't ask a BRICS nation to listen to a policy which is so destructive of humanity. And so what I'm saying is, entertain the ideas which Lyndon LaRouche developed, and I've tried to express in terms of the alternative, and also the limits of one's own actions if they're still being shaped by the system, and then hold your if you're a citizen in the United States in particular, hold your leaders responsible, but also contributing to their understanding of what the solution is. That's it. It really is a question of government by the consent of the governed. But as Nicholas of Cusa pointed out, the only problem with government by the consent of the governed is that the number of people who act foolishly is infinite. And of course, when he wrote, there wasn't any education whatsoever available. This is 1400s.
Wow.
So so how do you have government by the consent of the governed if that's the condition? Today we have a different situation, which is that people are so bombarded by misinformation and disinformation that you have to fight in order to really understand what the issues are, what the principles are for making decisions. I think in the case of Trump, what he's calling for is the United States to become a manufacturing superpower once again, to eliminate World War III and other wars, he's called for fair and reciprocal trade as opposed to free trade, and that does include protectionism. But we have to hold him accountable too. Will he act to eliminate these sanctions, which have been so destructive?
Right.
Okay. He's also promised to release all of the files on the assassination of JFK, of RFK, the assassination attempt against himself. That would be very important in terms of getting at some of the covert operations which have taken place. But one of the things to recognize is that after World War II and Roosevelt's death, you had the creation of the Five Eyes, which was which was basically something that was engineered by Churchill to make the U.S. a dumb giant on a British leash. And so you had, and I think the critical thing is going to be to break the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain.
Oh, interesting. Okay,
that's going to be critical to how we go forward. Will Trump do that? I don't know, but that's there's at least a possibility there, as opposed to with Kamala Harris. But there's no guarantee.
Yeah, we've got it. Yeah, I mean, I've heard a commentator just very recently say RFK Jr. as Attorney General. I can imagine if he was in that position, that would make things very interesting. But anyway, we've got to end it. Sorry.
Okay. All right.
I'm actually supposed to keep it under an hour, the director. But no, I really, and I've gone over because I really think this is very important. LaRouche and yourself, who's worked with him for 50 years more. LaRouche has passed now, obviously. Now you've spent a lot of your time bringing these ideas, very important ideas, and bringing solutions so that the citizens have the opportunity to learn about history and positive examples, negative examples, and then apply that in their duty as citizens. So I think it's really important. And hey, look, sue me, all right? We've gone over, but we'll end it off. Thank you so much, Will. We'd love to have you back on. If there's something more you'd like to discuss another time, let us know. If you've got something to propose, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you.
Great. I've enjoyed it, and I hope what I've said contributes to the common good.
I hope so too.
And I'll be very, very happy to come back on.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. All right. Let's end it off then, crew. If you've enjoyed this episode and wish to join the conversation, you can comment below. Please like and share this episode and spread it as far as possible. Remember, you're our only sponsor and every bit helps. Consider showing your support with a super thanks or buy us a coffee. Links are in the description. And even if you can't donate, sharing this video makes a huge difference. Thanks for tuning in to BRICS Briefs. Don't forget you can follow us on our Substack and other social media platforms, especially our Telegram channel, for daily news on BRICS, all linked below. Stay curious, stay connected, stay optimistic. Let's keep exploring together. Bye for now.